The galaxy was a noisy place, and humans were the loudest neighbors anyone had ever met. For 300 years, ever since the first alien ship landed on Earth and humans said hello to the universe, their voices had filled every corner of space. Human radio signals bounced between star systems carrying everything you could imagine: news reports, love songs, cooking shows, scientific discoveries, and endless arguments about sports teams from planets light years apart. It was like living next to a family that never slept. Human colonies had spread to 47 different solar systems, and each one buzzed with constant activity. Space stations chattered with traffic controllers guiding cargo ships. Research facilities shared their latest discoveries. Entertainment networks broadcast soap operas that had alien species hooked on human drama. Even their children's lullabies somehow found their way onto interstellar communication channels. The other alien species had gotten used to it. Some found it annoying, like the crystal beings who preferred meditation and silence. Others found it fascinating, especially the Zephyrians who loved collecting human music. The Galactic Council had even created special rules just to manage all the human noise. They called it the Human Communication Protocol, because humans talked so much they needed their own category. But on a Tuesday morning, Standard Galactic Date 2387.156, something impossible happened. Every single human voice in the galaxy went quiet at exactly the same moment. Not just the official government channels or the big news networks. Everything. The morning radio shows stopped mid-sentence. Ship captains stopped giving orders. Even the automated systems that announced arrival times at spaceports fell silent. The monitoring stations noticed first. These were massive listening posts scattered throughout the galaxy, designed to track communications and watch for emergencies. The Zephyrian operators at Station 7 were the first to report it. Their sensitive equipment, which could detect a whisper from 3 solar systems away, suddenly registered nothing from human space. It was like someone had turned off a waterfall that had been running for centuries. Within hours, panic spread through the Galactic Council headquarters on Nexus Prime. The emergency sirens wailed as representatives from dozens of alien species rushed into the Great Assembly Hall. What could cause every human in the galaxy to stop talking at the same time? A plague that affected their vocal cords? Some kind of invasion that had taken out their communication systems? A technical failure that had destroyed every single piece of human technology simultaneously? Admiral Vextar, a tough military commander from the Centaurian system, didn't waste time with theories. He ordered his fastest ships to investigate the closest human colonies immediately. These weren't just any ships. They were equipped with the most advanced sensors and medical equipment the galaxy had to offer. If the humans were in trouble, the Centaurian Defense Force would find out what was wrong and help them. The first reconnaissance ship reached the human colony of New Horizon within 6 hours. What they found was completely unexpected and somehow more disturbing than any disaster they had imagined. The colony was perfectly normal. Ships moved in and out of the spaceport on schedule. The lights were on in all the buildings. People walked through the streets, worked in their offices, and lived their daily lives exactly as they always had, except they weren't making a sound. Captain Kim Dae-ho was standing on the bridge of his colony ship, the New Soul, when the alien visitors arrived. He was a veteran officer who had been managing cargo shipments between planets for 20 years. When the Centaurian officers approached him with urgent questions about the silence, he responded in the strangest way imaginable. He smiled politely, nodded to acknowledge their presence, but then pointed to his ears and shook his head, with what looked like genuine sadness, as if he truly regretted not being able to speak. The alien investigators tried everything. They used translation devices, sign language, even drew pictures in the dirt. The humans understood perfectly. They nodded and gestured back, but they absolutely refused to make any sound. It was like they had all taken a vow of silence. But why? At the Kepler Research Station, Commander Park So-min continued her duties, as if nothing had changed. She coordinated the movement of cargo ships using elaborate hand signals and patterns of colored lights. Her team followed her instructions perfectly, operating with a precision that was almost supernatural. They had somehow developed an entire system of silent communication overnight. The most unsettling part was how coordinated it all seemed. This wasn't chaos or confusion. It was organized. The humans were clearly communicating with each other, just not in any way that made sound. They moved like dancers who had rehearsed the same routine 1,000 times, each person knowing exactly what to do without being told. More investigation teams arrived at other human colonies, and they all reported the same thing. 47 different star systems, billions of people, all maintaining perfect silence while going about their business as usual. The humans seemed to be waiting for something. But what? And how had they coordinated this impossible act of silence across distances so vast that light itself took years to travel between their worlds? The galaxy held its breath, waiting for answers that never came. The third day of humanity's mysterious silence brought terror from the depths of space. The galaxy's most powerful long-range sensors, machines that could detect a single ship from halfway across the universe, suddenly screamed with alerts. Something massive was moving toward them, from the empty darkness between galaxies, from the cold void where nothing was supposed to exist. They called them the Devourers, though that name came from ancient legends that most people thought were just scary stories. These weren't ships built by any known civilization. They were living creatures the size of small moons, bioships that pulsed with their own heartbeat and breathed in the vacuum of space. Their skin looked like black metal crossed with organic tissue, and they moved through space like enormous fish swimming through an invisible ocean. The first scout ships that detected them couldn't believe the readings. The Devourer swarm stretched across distances that boggled the mind, not just hundreds or thousands of ships, but millions of these living vessels flowing toward the galaxy like a river of nightmares. Each individual creature was larger than most space stations, and together they formed a wall of living darkness that seemed to have no end. But size wasn't their most terrifying feature. The Devourers were hungry, and what they ate was energy itself, specifically electromagnetic energy. Radio waves, communication signals, power transmissions, even the electrical impulses that ran through computer systems. They absorbed it all, like cosmic vampires, growing stronger and larger with every signal they consumed. News of the approaching threat spread through the galaxy faster than wildfire. Every government, every military force, every spacefaring civilization understood immediately that this was an extinction-level event. If the Devourers reached the populated systems, they would drain every piece of technology, leaving entire worlds dark and dead. Admiral Vextar found himself commanding the largest military force in galactic history. Ships poured in from every corner of known space, sleek Andromedan cruisers, crystalline Zephyrian fighters, massive Centaurian battleships, and vessels from dozens of other species. 12,000 ships representing 43 different civilizations, all united by the desperate need to survive. The massive fleet gathered at a place called the Meridian Junction, a strategic point in space where several major shipping lanes crossed. It should have been humanity's greatest moment of cooperation, species that had been enemies for centuries now fighting side by side, but instead, everything started falling apart almost immediately. The problem was communication. With so many different species, languages, and technologies coordinating an attack required constant radio chatter, tactical updates, position reports, targeting data, emergency warnings. The fleet needed to share thousands of pieces of information every minute to fight effectively, but every single transmission made the enemy stronger. Lieutenant Lee Min-ho was aboard the human destroyer Busan's Pride when the first battle began. He pressed his face against the viewport, watching in horror as the Third Fleet moved into attack position. The fleet commander was giving orders over the radio, coordinating a pincer movement that should have caught a group of Devourers in crossfire. Instead, the enemy heard every word. The Devourers could sense electromagnetic signals like sharks, smell blood in water. They immediately changed course, swarming toward the source of the communications. The more the fleet commanders tried to coordinate their response, the more they revealed their positions and plans. Min-ho watched helplessly as the living ships fell upon the Third Fleet like a pack of wolves. The Devourers didn't need weapons, in the traditional sense. They simply attached themselves to the enemy vessels and began draining power directly through the ship's own communication systems. Within minutes, the proud warships became floating coffins as their life support, engines, and weapons died. 3,000 ships and their crews were lost in the first engagement. 3,000 vessels that had been humanity's allies and protectors, destroyed because they tried to work together. The remaining fleet commanders faced an impossible choice: maintain communication and feed their enemy, or fight in isolation against creatures that moved as one perfect unit. Meanwhile, on Earth, something extraordinary was happening in the basement laboratories of the Global Defense Initiative. Captain Choi Yoon-ji sat in a meditation chamber surrounded by quantum computers and brain monitoring equipment. She wasn't moving, barely seemed to be breathing, but her mind was reaching across impossible distances. Years earlier, human scientists had discovered something that other species thought was impossible: that consciousness itself could detect disturbances in space-time. Through deep meditation combined with quantum technology, specially trained humans could sense major events before they happened, feeling ripples in reality itself like a spider feels vibrations in its web. Yoon-ji had been one of the first volunteers for these experiments. For 3 days, she and hundreds of other quantum meditators had been sitting in perfect silence, their minds stretched across the galaxy, feeling for the approaching threat. They had detected the devourers days before any sensor, sensing their hunger as a disturbance in the fabric of space itself. The meditation chambers were connected to Earth's defense networks, but no signals went out. Instead, the information was passed through the quantum meditation network, from mind to mind, until every human in the galaxy knew the truth. The enemy was coming, and the only way to defeat creatures that fed on communication was to fight them, in perfect silence. The hardest part wasn't detecting the threat or even staying quiet. The hardest part was watching their alien allies destroy themselves with their own voices, knowing that humanity had the solution, but being unable to share it without making everything worse. The fate of the galaxy now rested on whether humans could save everyone without saying a single word. Just when the galactic fleet seemed doomed to destroy itself through its own desperate communications, something beautiful and impossible happened. Human ships began arriving at the Meridian Junction, but not the way anyone expected. They didn't come screaming in with sirens blaring and radio chatter filling the airwaves like every other military force in galactic history. Instead, they moved like ghosts through space, silent as falling snow. Captain Yoon-ji Hai commanded the Soul Guardian, a sleek destroyer that led a squadron of 12 human vessels. As she approached the massive alien armada, her ships moved in perfect formation, each one knowing exactly where to go without a single word being spoken. It was like watching a school of fish swim through a coral reef, every movement coordinated and graceful, every ship in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The alien commanders were stunned. How were the humans coordinating so perfectly? Admiral Vextar watched from his command bridge as human ships slipped between his massive Centaurian battleships, like needles threading through cloth. They weren't just flying randomly. They had a plan, a complex and sophisticated plan that somehow every human pilot understood, without anyone explaining it to them. The answer lay in something that had taken humanity 3 centuries to perfect: the art of truly knowing their neighbors. During their time among the stars, humans had done something that no other species had bothered with. They had studied everyone else with the dedication of scientists and the love of friends. They knew that Zephyrian pilots always favored turning, left when startled. They knew that Andromedan ships needed 30 seconds longer than most to charge their weapons. They knew that crystalline entities couldn't see clearly in certain types of starlight. This knowledge became the foundation for the most incredible display of silent communication the galaxy had ever witnessed. The humans began to implement movement, patterns that looked like an elaborate dance. Commander Oh Sung-woo, piloting a heavy cruiser called the Busan Defender, demonstrated the first technique. He positioned his ship directly behind a confused Zephyrian vessel that was drifting out of formation, then used his ship's gravitational field to gently nudge it back into the optimal firing position. It was such a subtle maneuver that the Zephyrian captain barely felt it, but suddenly his ship was in the perfect spot to target an approaching group of devourers. The Zephyrian looked at his instruments, looked at the human ship behind him, and something clicked. The human wasn't just randomly flying around, he was helping, guiding, teaching without words. Captain Nam Yujin took this concept even further. Her destroyer squadron began surrounding alien vessels that were isolated and vulnerable, creating protective formations that shielded them from devourer attacks. But she did it so smoothly, so naturally, that it took the alien crews several minutes to realize they were being protected. Her ships moved like a pack of wolves defending their family, but wolves that communicated through instinct rather than howls. The most challenging task fell to Major Jung Haiwan, a brilliant tactician who had spent years studying interspecies military cooperation. She commanded a small, fast corvette that could change direction quickly and perform complex maneuvers. Her job was perhaps the most important and difficult, teaching 43 different alien species to fight as one unified force without speaking a single word. Haiwan's ship became a teacher, performing elaborate flight patterns that slowly became a new language. When she flew in tight, rapid spirals, it meant enemy targets on your left side. When she performed wide, sweeping spirals, it meant form defensive positions. When she flipped her ship upside down and spiraled in the opposite direction, it meant danger approaching from below. Take evasive action. At first, the alien pilots were confused and frustrated. They tried to radio the human ships, demanding explanations, but received only silence. Some commanders grew angry, thinking the humans were ignoring them or playing games during a life-or-death crisis. But slowly, as they watched the patterns repeat and saw how other ships responded, understanding began to dawn. A Centaurian captain was the first to figure it out. He watched Haiwan's corvette perform the tight spiral pattern, saw other ships immediately turn to target something on their left, and realized that the spirals were instructions. He tried following the pattern himself, and suddenly found his weapons locked onto a devourer that he hadn't even noticed approaching. Word spread through the alien fleets, but not through radio communications. Instead, alien ships began copying the human movement patterns, passing the silent language from vessel to vessel through demonstration and observation. Within hours, thousands of ships from dozens of different species were beginning to move as one coordinated force. The breakthrough came when the alien commanders finally understood the deeper truth. The humans weren't just maintaining silence to protect themselves. They were forcing the entire Galactic Armada to fight without communications, because that was the only way to defeat an enemy that fed on those very signals. Every word spoken over the radio made the devourers stronger. Every tactical transmission revealed their positions and plans. The only way to win was to become silent predators, hunting creatures that had grown fat and lazy from feeding on the galaxy's constant chatter. Captain Bei Min Seo, commanding the flagship Soul's Pride, began the final positioning sequence. Her massive battleship moved with the grace of a dancer, leading the human fleet into a complex formation that would serve as the backbone for the entire Galactic Armada. Around her, 12,000 ships from 43 different species began to move in harmony, their crews finally understanding that they were about to fight the most important battle in galactic history without saying a single word. The stage was set for a battle unlike anything the universe had ever seen. A completely silent war that would determine whether civilization survived or fell to an ancient hunger that had waited eons for this moment. The moment of truth arrived, when the Devourer swarm finally reached the inner star systems where billions of people lived on countless worlds. For the first time in galactic history, these ancient predators found themselves in a strange and terrifying situation. They were starving. The cosmic ocean that had always been filled with the electromagnetic chatter of civilizations was suddenly, impossibly silent. The bioships began to panic. These creatures had existed for millions of years, drifting through the void between galaxies, feeding on the radio signals and energy transmissions of entire civilizations before moving on to consume the next. They had grown fat and lazy from this easy feeding, their massive forms designed to absorb and process the constant stream of communications that every advanced society produced. But now, as they approached what should have been the greatest feast in their existence, they found nothing but silence. The Devourer swarm, which had moved with perfect coordination across the emptiness of space, began to break apart. Individual bioships scattered in different directions, desperately searching for any source of electromagnetic energy they could find. Some turned toward distant pulsars, others toward the natural radio emissions of gas giants, their ancient formation dissolving into chaos. This was exactly what the Silent Armada had been waiting for. What followed was the most extraordinary military engagement in the history of the galaxy, a battle involving hundreds of thousands of warships from dozens of different species, all fighting in complete and absolute silence. Commander Shin Do-hyun found himself at the center of this impossible symphony of war. His cruiser, the Incheon Blade, became like the conductor of the largest orchestra ever assembled. Using precise ship movements, carefully timed light patterns, and even the gravitational effects of his vessel's engines, he coordinated attacks that spanned entire solar systems. When Do-hyun's ship performed a specific barrel roll, followed by 3 short bursts from his maneuvering thrusters, it was a signal that traveled through the fleet like a wave. Zephyrian. Fighters would see the pattern and know to begin their attack run. Crystalline entities would shift their formation in response. Andromedan dreadnoughts would charge their massive weapon systems, all without a single word being spoken. Captain Kang Subin had perhaps the most delicate job in the entire battle. The Andromedan dreadnoughts were the largest and most powerful ships in the Allied fleet, but they were also the clumsiest. These massive vessels could destroy a dozen Devourers with a single shot, but only if they were positioned correctly. Subin's destroyer became a sheepdog, using careful gravitational nudges and precise flying to guide these gigantic ships into optimal firing positions. It was like watching someone try to herd elephants through a china shop, except the elephants were the size of small cities and the china shop was an active battlefield. Subin would approach an Andromedan dreadnought from behind, matching its speed perfectly, then use her ship's artificial gravity generators to create gentle pushes that would rotate the massive vessel just a few degrees. To the Andromedan crew, it felt like a slight course correction, but it was actually Subin positioning them to unleash devastating firepower on clusters of confused Devourers. Major Rute Young commanded a squadron of fast attack ships that specialized in hit-and-run tactics, but in this silent battle, his role became something completely different. His ships became gap makers, flying intricate patterns that created openings in the Allied formation, just long enough for other species fighters to dart through and attack vulnerable Devourers. It was like watching a complicated dance where Ryu's ships would spread apart at exactly the right moment, creating a corridor that existed for maybe 30 seconds. In that brief window, Zephyrian fighters would streak through at incredible speed, unleash their weapons on a group of bioships, and disappear before the Devourers could respond. Then Ryu's squadron would close the gap, protecting the other fighters as they regrouped for the next attack. The humans had spent 3 centuries learning everything they could about their alien neighbors. They knew that Centaurian pilots preferred frontal attacks and had trouble with sudden direction changes. They knew that crystalline entities could phase shift through solid matter but needed 30 seconds to recharge between shifts. They knew that Zephyrian fighters were incredibly fast but had limited fuel reserves. All of this knowledge became weapons in the silent battle. Human ships would position themselves to cover for Centaurian weaknesses, create opportunities that played to Zephyrian strengths, and coordinate attacks that used every species' natural abilities to their fullest potential. The battle raged for 18 hours across 7 different star systems. It was like fighting a war that stretched across distances so vast that light itself took hours to travel from one end to the other. Ships that were destroyed in one system wouldn't be missed by their allies in another system until the light from the explosion finally reached them. But slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. The Devourers, starved of the electromagnetic energy they needed to coordinate and strengthen themselves, began to weaken. Their bioships, which had moved as one perfect organism for millions of years, started to fracture and fight among themselves. Some turned on their own kind, trying to drain energy from other Devourers in their desperation. Lieutenant Seo Min-jun watched it all from his gunner position aboard the destroyer Daigu's Fury. He had the best view in the fleet as the final phase of the battle unfolded. Through his targeting scope, He could see the last clusters of devourers retreating toward the edge of the galaxy, their ancient formation completely broken. These creatures that had consumed entire civilizations were fleeing like beaten animals. Their million-year reign of terror ended by something they had never encountered before: prey that refused to make a sound. The galaxy's greatest predators had finally met something they couldn't eat: the power of perfect silence and cooperation. As the last bioship disappeared into the darkness between stars, Minjun allowed himself a small smile. They had done the impossible: saved the galaxy without firing a single communication or speaking a single word. The last Devourer bioship was nothing more than a dark speck disappearing into the endless void between galaxies when the most beautiful sound in the universe finally broke the silence. It was a human voice, clear and strong, cutting through the cosmic quiet that had lasted for nearly a week. Admiral Park Chan-woo sat in the command chair of his flagship, the Sejong the Great, watching the final enemy retreat on his view screen. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the communication controls that had been silent for so long. When he pressed the transmit button and spoke into his microphone, his words carried across the galaxy like the first bird song after a long winter. Galactic Command. This is the Human Defense Fleet. The enemy has been repelled. Communication channels are now safe for normal operations. Those simple words triggered an explosion of sound across the galaxy. Alien commanders who had been holding their breath for days suddenly burst into cheers, victory songs, and prayers of gratitude in dozens of different languages. The Zephyrian pilots sang their traditional war chants. The crystalline entities chimed like crystal bells ringing in celebration. Even the normally stoic Centaurian officers allowed themselves to whoop with joy. But beneath all the celebration, there was a deeper question that every alien species wanted answered. How had the humans known? How had they understood the threat? Before anyone else? How had they coordinated the most complex military operation in galactic history without speaking a single word? The answer, when it finally came, became the stuff of legend throughout the galaxy. It started with a group of human archaeologists working on a dig site in the ruins of an ancient civilization called the Keth Mori, a species that had vanished mysteriously about 50,000 years ago. The archaeologists had been studying strange patterns carved into stone tablets when they realized these weren't just decorative designs. They were warnings. Dr. Kim Yeon-seo had been the first to decode the message. The Keth Mori had encountered the Devourers before and had tried to fight them using conventional tactics. The stone tablets told the story of how their communications had been used against them, how every radio signal had made their enemies stronger, and how their entire civilization had been consumed in a matter of days. But buried in their final desperate messages was something invaluable: detailed information about devourer feeding patterns and behavior. Meanwhile, in secret laboratories around Earth, human scientists had been working on something that other species thought was impossible. They had discovered that human consciousness, when properly trained and enhanced with quantum technology, could detect disturbances in the fabric of space-time itself. It sounded like science fiction, but Captain Choi Yoon-ji and hundreds of other quantum meditators had proven it worked. These specially trained humans could sit in meditation chambers connected to quantum computers and somehow sense major events before they happened. They felt the approach of the Devourer swarm like a disturbance in the Force, days before the most sensitive instruments could detect anything. It was this early warning that had given humanity time to prepare their incredible plan. But the most remarkable part wasn't the early detection or even the archaeological discoveries. It was the strategic conclusion that human military planners had reached. The only way to defeat an enemy that fed on communication was to coordinate the largest military force in galactic history without anyone saying a word. Captain Lee Hyo-jin found herself addressing a gathering of alien commanders from 43 different species in the aftermath of the victory. The Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime was packed with beings of every shape and size imaginable, all wanting to understand how the humans had pulled off this miracle. The truth is, Hyo-jin explained, we spent 300 years doing what no other species had ever bothered to do. We studied you, all of you. We learned your languages, your customs, your fighting styles, your strengths and weaknesses. We became students of every species we met. She gestured to the mixed crowd of aliens before her. "We knew that Zephyrian pilots always turned left when startled, because we watched you train for decades. We knew that Andromedan dreadnoughts need exactly 37 seconds to charge their main weapons, because we timed every battle we fought alongside you. We knew that crystalline entities can phase through solid matter, but need to rest afterward, because we observed it happening thousands of times." The alien commanders listened in stunned silence as Hyojin continued. "The Great Silence wasn't about showing off human abilities. It was about using everything we had learned about our friends and allies to guide you through the most important battle of our lives. We couldn't tell you the plan because the enemy would have heard us, so instead, we had to show you through actions and movements that we hoped you would understand." The Galactic Council officially designated the engagement as the Silent Victory, and immediately established something called the Human Coordination Protocol. This new system would allow human strategists to take command during future crisis situations, using their unique understanding of interspecies cooperation to coordinate responses that no single species could manage alone. But among the veterans, who had actually fought in that impossible battle, it was remembered by a different name. They called it the day we learned to listen, because they had discovered that sometimes the most powerful form of communication isn't speaking at all. It's understanding someone so well that you can guide them without words. Commander and So Young sat in her quiet office weeks later, writing the official report that would be studied by military academies for centuries to come. As she typed her final conclusions, she realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had saved everyone not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through the simple act of paying attention. For 3 centuries, while other species had been focused on their own affairs, humans had been listening, learning, and caring about their neighbors. In the end, that care and attention had become the weapon that saved the galaxy, teaching an entire armada to hear the music hidden in perfect silence.